Hi.
So I'm Elena, and I'm a senior editor at Airmail. For those of you who don't know Airmail, it is a digital magazine founded by the longtime Vanity Fair editor, Graydon Carter, and the former New York Times, Rome, and Moscow bureau chief, Alessandra Stanley. We cover subjects both foreign and domestic, ranging from politics and the environment to art and literature, style and fashion, high-end crime, and beyond, with some of the world's finest journalists. Adam is a designer, co-founder of Charlap Hyman Herrero, an architecture and design firm with offices in New York and LA. He's a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design. He's held fellowships at the RISD Museum and worked as a design consultant for Polo Ralph Lauren. Since co-founding his firm in 2014 with Andre Herrero, he has gained widespread recognition in the industry, including being named to the Architectural Digest's AD 100 list. So when you met your business partner, Andre Herrero, back at university, you decided to photograph your apartment at various times of day with different cameras over 6 months to make it look like it had been around for many years. Why did you do that, and what did that teach you for future projects?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here, inviting me to do this with you. Yeah, I think that as a designer of spaces, I've been interested, whether I knew it or not, in the passage of time and the way that time affects an interior. And when I was at RISD, I was studying furniture design, and I had this rental apartment for my senior year, and I made a lot of the furniture for the apartment. And the apartment had kind of been conceived of as an homage to this interior that there were no photos of. There were just descriptions that I could find that belonged to Nikki de Gunsberg, who was this incredible figure in fashion history, and he was in Vampire, in Dreyer's Vampire in the 30s, and he'd had this incredible life, starting off with a very splashy youth, and had thrown amazing parties, and had grown up in the Crillon in Paris, and had wound up as an editor in New York, living in a very glorious studio apartment that I had found these kind of couple wonderful descriptions of. So I sort of made my little senior year apartment this sort of homage to his one-room apartment, and I made all this furniture, and then at the end I needed to document it because it was my thesis project, and Andre Herrero, who was an architecture student, also was a good photographer, and he came up with this idea to photograph it with different cameras at all different times of day, and it was such a cool idea. I mean, I think it really played into my interest in filmmaking and the idea that we could sort of make a collage of a kind of experience that wasn't real, that we could invent a whole story out of these images. And so we wound up with black and white photos and Polaroids and all these different formats of imagery that suggested that, you know, I might have lived in this apartment for you know, decades. And then later on, you know, after I graduated and he graduated and we started a firm together, I think that sort of initial way that we'd come together and done this creative project together did inform a lot about the way we've approached everything that we've done together, which is to say that we are really interested in how you can sort of layer different narratives to make the suggestion of something much larger, that you can sort of tweak the way history is perceived, you can shape the way people understand a space by enhancing certain aspects of its story, and you can invent things. You can make it more funny or interesting than it maybe actually ever was, and that potential has always kind of been at the core, I think, of what we're drawn to and what we try to do.
So you mentioned how in like sometimes when you're working like on a long-term project over many years, you make like a choice early, like painting a wall orange, and then by the end of the time like the design is completed, you kind of view it as a mistake. Do you think that it was perhaps like a catalyst for something like a learning step, or do you think maybe sometimes you can be affected by trends and that those trends, and you realize that you're kind of being like basically the evolution is being affected by.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, and I guess there is this funny thing that happens, like what you're
Right.
talking about with this color orange or something. That though I would never have painted a single wall. We don't do accent walls, but
I don't think you said orange when we talked.
But we do. Projects take a long time, and so, at the beginning of a project, you might be interested in a specific, like a color, and then it's part of the zeitgeist. You're interested in it, and everybody's interested in
Right.
it, and so you do something. You make a whole plan, and it's got this color in it, and then by the time you're actually able to execute it, which might be after the construction has finished and maybe 2 whole years have gone by, there's already, a crate and barrel collection that's been photographed in front of this color, and it's the color of the year,
Right.
and it's like, and you're like, oh my God, like that now this isn't special anymore,
Right.
and I think that, hopefully it's something that, you've questioned enough that you've come to the conclusion that you really do like it for the right reasons, that you really have, established a connection to that thing that you like, and then you've done this thing with confidence and with real passion, and hopefully it can weather it's sort of maybe being less interesting because everybody else is interested in it once you've finally gotten to it. But I think there are always things that you want to change, and there are always things that you get 2 years later and you want to refresh your space, and you can't be totally dogmatic that you stick with only things that are timeless. I mean, there's no such thing, really.
Right.
So you have to be flexible and willing to change, and the context does change, But yeah, I think a lot of this is about confidence, I guess, and I guess where do you get confidence from? I mean, you get confidence from looking at history, from establishing your choices in a matrix of other people's choices and other things that have, standards that are compelling and inspiring, and that meet those standards. And so, for instance, I guess if we would take orange, for example, I would say like one of my favorite interiors is Henri Samuel's living room, which is completely bathed in this incredible orange color. And, you could never take that away. It's never less amazing. So even if, you've got orange everywhere and it's kind of uncool, I mean, it's still cool in Henri Samuel's living room, which is proof that it can always be amazing. So there's no such thing as, oh, it's over.
Right.
Or oh, you've totally, if you do it well, it doesn't matter if it's in trend or out of trend, or, everyone's doing it or no one's doing it. I mean, it's just, you have to find what's good about a thing, and that's resistant to some extent of, I guess, what time can do to something.
Right. Sometimes overly theme-specific, like interiors, maybe like adhering strictly to Art Deco or mid-century modern, can feel dated or like oppressively one note. How do you help clients avoid that?
Yeah, I guess we've never I've never really been drawn to like the period room in its most essential form, where everything is one, from one exact moment in history. And, it's not because it's bad or anything. I think I've always been interested in the tension between objects and the way that certain objects can bring out qualities in others that sort of wind up enhancing your ability to see those qualities, that you can appreciate something because it's different than the other thing that it's next to. And that is sort of where a lot of the geometry behind the rooms that we make comes from, I guess, is sort of establishing what can be in tension with what, and how those things can sort of harmoniously work together in tension. And I think that's what's cool to me. So I think of like, well, we were kind of talking about this room, this Marie Laure Genois amazing Jean-Michel Franck room, and also she had also the amazing Mallet Stevens house in the south of France. That these were two very pure examples that were delivered to her by incredible architects and designers that really gave her something pure, a pure expression of a time, of a way of thinking, of a whole movement. And I'm almost less interested in them for that, and more because when you look at them photographed, most of the time the photographs show them in these later iterations than right when they were finished, quote unquote. And the later iterations show them, like the greatest iteration of the Mallet Stevens room, that's like a pink room with this cubist skylight ceiling, is when in fact she's recovered all of the pure, deco furniture with floral slipcovers, and there's like little ruffles, and she's brought in Georges Chavois to make it more sort of pleasant because she wanted to. She was tight, her eye was roaming. She was learning. She was changing. She was looking for new ways to excite herself, and she was building on this base that she had, but it had morphed into something totally personal and weird and like singular. And I mean, that's the interesting version of the room
Right.
to me. So I think maybe it's just personal, but I'll always be drawn to a room that has a lot of things going on in it, with different perspectives and things that seem, at odds with each other, but actually have some kind of beautiful relationship to each other. I'll always favor that over maybe the one note
Right.
room, even if that can be amazing.
So going off of that, the art collector Dominique de Menel once compared designing a room to hosting a dinner party. She argues a mix of personalities, ages, and histories creates depth and energy in a room. Do you agree with her assessment, and has it informed your own work?
Yeah, I love that idea, and I mean, most of you are probably aware of her. You've seen images of her house, but it was this great Philip Johnson house, this very modernist, mid-century expression, architectural expression in Houston, and then she had brought in the designer Charles James, who actually Ricky worked for, who's sitting in the front row. Still legendary. Yeah, so she had brought in this designer, this fashion designer, who was, there was a great show at the Met of his designs some years ago, but essentially I think of him as kind of a surrealist and a kind of a sculptor. Really doing something extreme with clothes. And he brought into this kind of Philip Johnson house that looked like a museum, basically.
Right.
He brought all of this texture and color, and he brought forms that were, at great odds with the architecture. I mean, this amazing sofa that sort of almost looks like a mouth, and just incredible departure from what the building was giving, that gave it so much life. And then it sort of, because she had sort of messed up the architecture with Charles James, but I mean, she made it better. But because she had already kind of established that this was not going to be this pure expression of Johnson's, it freed her up to sort of bring in all of these other elements. So there's pieces of furniture from her family, things from, provincial French furniture, incredible art, and everything is unified, I think. I mean, the way I see that house and the way I see sort of her project as kind of a collector and a curator and a chooser of things and a patron, I see her as somebody that was really searching for, she was searching for God in objects, and she was looking for the soul and the expression of God in a painting, a building, a table, I mean, a ray of light. I mean, she was really a very spiritual person, and she saw the human hand as an imprint of something divine, and that was much bigger than, the beauty of a chair. And so even simple objects that might just be inherited that are not that exciting per se in that house, like there's some French chairs that kind of look like, not, at first glance you're not like, oh my God, this is like some incredible thing that, needs to be in a museum. But when you spend a little bit of time seeing everything all together, you realize that there's a line, there's this line, and there's a kind of soulfulness that's exuding, an aura from everything there. And it's really impressive. And so I guess when I think the dinner party idea is so great, but it's a very simple way of saying, I think, what she was really doing, which is like looking for quality in objects, a certain kind of quality that exists in an object regardless of where it comes from and how much it costs and who made it necessarily. It's something that's much more important than that, and it's much more essential, and it's not about a market, and it's not about who else has it. It's something that, if you spend a lot of time with objects, hopefully you can do that too.
Yeah.
It's something else. So, but I think the dinner party analogy is really a great kind of easy way to digest this principle that, you would want a dinner, if you want a room like you want a dinner party. You want an old person, young person, hot person, smart person, hilarious person. You wouldn't want only good-looking people.
Right.
And you wouldn't want only smart people. And you would want the mix. And I think it's a good thing. Maybe, it's an easy way to remember, and maybe it gives everybody a little bit of confidence to remember it when you're sort of taking something that doesn't belong in your Art Deco room or your, your Victorian house, and you're putting something modern in it. You don't have to be so concerned, maybe.
Right. We all, over time, change our tastes and cast out pieces we once loved and are now done with. Hopefully one's eye becomes more refined with the more we learn. Does it take delicate encouragement or a bold push to help your clients invest in a single high-quality work of art or piece of furniture? And how do you kind of guide them towards this level of discernment?
Yeah, I guess when we start, I think maybe one of the most fun things about my job is that is this very special experience of going back to a project you've worked on and people have lived in this project, and they've been using it, and their kids are. Actually, on Friday, I was just in a house that I had decorated some rooms in the house like 10 years ago, and one of the rooms was this little girl's room, and she was 13 at the time, and now she's 22 or 23, and she's living at home after having graduated college. And it was the craziest thing to see how she's inhabited this room, and so much of this girl's life has taken place in this space that we made for her, and things have changed and evolved, and she brought things with her to college, and then now she wants to be in the world of design, and so she has a whole perspective, and it was just this very beautiful thing. But I mean, I guess it's a very cool thing to start a project with someone. Oftentimes, what they like at the very beginning informs the way that the project evolves. But by the end, they do like different things, and you've both sort of been able to learn together about what the best version of the thing is that you're trying to do there. And so it's a learning process, I guess. And a lot of people that we work with wind up getting really into it. And by the end or after I'm out of the picture, they're still buying stuff, and they've kind of gone on a whole journey, and they're like, adding to what we've made together in really exciting ways that are personal to them, that still build on the thing that we made together. And I mean, I love that. I really love that. And so one of the other reasons that maybe I wouldn't be drawn to making a period room or something is that I see my job oftentimes as sort of setting people up to be able to live their lives and like be interested and be collecting and be seeing and be growing and expanding well after I'm having done the final part of the punch list.
Certain pieces like Lalanne's furniture and Yves Saint Laurent's interiors retain their relevance across decades despite having been like trendy. What do you believe allows these items, like in fashion, say like a Chanel suit, to withstand the test of time?
Yeah, I think that some things really are they just work. I mean, some things really, really are good. I mean, I guess the Chanel suit is one of them. I mean, it just seems to never. It has not faded somehow, which is just kind of a crazy thing. Elena chuckled because we were kind of we were joking when we were talking about doing this panel about the idea of things that are in trend, and how do you avoid sort of partaking in a trend that goes out of style. And I was thinking of Lalande because there's Lalande represented throughout this fair, and we're seeing Lalande everywhere. And I was thinking about, that trend, this trend of Lalande, and how that's kind of an interesting example, because I actually really love Lalande, and I think that those pieces are amazing, and I believe that they will still be amazing well after this trend has seemingly exhausted our interest for them, because then we will sort of stop looking at Lalande so much, and there will kind of be less Lalande in salon fair and everything, and 30 years it will be exciting again, because it really is good, and it's worth trying very, very hard to figure out what is actually good. And to not get distracted by, is it in trend or not, or is everybody buying it, or is everybody not buying it? I mean, you really have to look so hard, and I think one of the ways that you can avoid maybe winding up falling into certain types of pitfalls with buying things that then, it wasn't worth it actually in 30 years. You're like, why did I do that thing that everyone was doing, and now it's worthless, I don't like it, nobody likes it. I think you can educate yourself enough to probably avoid most of those things. So I don't think that it's inevitable, and I also don't. Some things are popular because they're good.
Right.
So you can accept that, and some things are popular not because they're good, and you have to figure out which is which. So
Right.
in my opinion, Lalan is, it's not lame. It's
Right.
not really worth an eye roll because it's everywhere. I mean, it's like it's
Incredible.
everywhere because
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah. So the New York art dealer Leo Castelli famously curated art with an eye toward how it would be viewed in the future, often shaping art history through his choices. Obviously, the past, the present, and the future are very much at play when you design an interior. But does one of these have more influence than the others?
I think it's a very interesting thing to try to understand, what is coming, what will be important in 30 years. And when you're buying things for an interior that is someone else's, the stakes are kind of high. It's not just, a question of, well, will you like it in 30 years? It's a question also of, will they like it in 30 years if they are having a divorce and they do an auction and then they go to sell this stuff and you told them it was worth it to spend, $45,000 on a chair, and then they go at auction and it's for two, are you gonna feel good? Are they gonna be angry? And, whatever. It's like you do have to think about this stuff.
Right.
And I really love the kind of game of it. And I read that Leo Castelli book, Leo and His Circle, by Annie Cohen-Salal, and it's amazing book. I mean, it took me forever because it's like this thick, but I loved that book. And it kind of, I guess the premise of the book is to describe how Castelli was able to project what would be valuable and what would be important, and how he was able to shape our idea of art history, and how did he get it right every time? How did the artist that he showed wind up always becoming part of the canon? And the reason I say it's sort of a game is because by the end of the book, you sort of understand how he did it. It's like you have to be able to sort of remove yourself and try to find patterns and try to find a line of history, and easy ways to do it. I mean, there are just a few easy ways to do it. I mean, some of it is about, he was obviously a brilliant person, so I'm not saying anybody could do that, but there are some easy tricks. I mean, one is you look at who everyone is copying,
Right.
You can find who is at the helm of a specific train of thought by looking at who was doing this thing first that now all of a sudden you see everywhere. And probably that person is somebody that it would be worth thinking about getting something from if you like that style. You shouldn't get one of the people that are copying them. You should look for the origin. And then when you find the origin, or there are always a few people at the center of a given train of thought. So when you find that person, then you find, who do they really like? Who are they really inspired by? And, then you wind up looking backwards. So you've gotten out of the present and you're in the past and you're looking at the past and you see, so I think of like my peers, like Katie Stout and Misha Khan, who really, I believe they were at the front of a certain sort of school of design. And they were looking at Max Lamb, and Max Lamb had changed the way that galleries could deal furniture and the way that people were thinking about sort of function and furniture and art furniture and value and materiality, et cetera. I don't know. He was very important, and he had opened a lot of doors. So they were looking at him. So I think, if you're going to collect them, then you should also maybe think about what is interesting to collect of Max Lamb. And then Max Lamb was looking at Gaetano Pesce, and Pesce opened up so many doors that, made it possible for Max Lamb to do what he did. And so very quickly you begin to establish, this is an arc, this is a whole story. And it makes it easier to think, oh, well, then what is coming after,
Right.
you know? And people are reactive, people are inspired by people, and they reject people, and so you look at this kind of seesaw, and you begin to just understand where things are going a little bit. Not that you can see with a crystal ball and be right every time, but, you know, if you like the thing, and it's good, and it has some sort of aura, like a dominial, you know, godly aura, and it fits into this kind of narrative arc, this canon that you're making in your head, then it's a good bet. And on trend, off trend, I don't know, you know, it doesn't really matter. I mean, then it's just, you're talking about history.
Right.
And that's more interesting.
And how important is functionality when selecting items for a space that's meant to endure? Like, do you think a purely decorative piece can be timeless, or does practical use add to its lasting value?
I think that, I mean, one of the cool things about furniture and design is that it is functional. So, or it can be. So that's always kind of fun. And I think the idea is that you can live with the stuff and you can use it, and it can be a part of your everyday life in a tactile, practical way. And I love that. So I really like to find things that do work for people and do perform sometimes kind of banal functions, even if they're exquisite objects. And I really enjoy that part of all of this. Otherwise, I would just buy art, I guess. but yeah, so I like that. But then, of course, there are different ways to define what a function can be, and sometimes some things function is that it balances, it balances an asymmetrical room, and so it doesn't really matter if that console table is a little fragile because it's made out of mother of pearl and paper mache, and no, you're not going to really be serving dinner for 30 off of this console table,
Right.
but you can put one candlestick there, and really the function of it is that it balances the room. And that, so I'm kind of open-ended. I have an open-ended definition of what exactly functional means, but maybe that's kind of an annoying answer.
Fair enough. And if you wanted to create a furniture collection that speaks both to the 90s and to 2030, how would you begin? It's a tough question.
Yeah, I guess if I wanted to create a furniture collection that, well, I guess I think of the idea of collage and putting things together that create something greater than the sum of the parts. And we start every project in our studio with reference image kind of review with our clients, and so we look at hundreds of images that speak to all different aspects of the project. And I would do the same for a furniture collection. And when you're looking at such breadth of imagery and so many different approaches to things, you can only be, the only result of that kind of collage is something that is new and unique. I mean, I think one of the pitfalls of people designing, let's say, a furniture collection that I can kind of see, and having worked at a company where we were producing a furniture line, one of the things that can go really wrong is that you only have a few reference images. You only have 10, and they're all tacked on a little mood board with like some pieces of fabric. I never understood how people how would you and then of course it sort of looks like those things.
Right.
And it's like a kind of a bad copy. So I try to just put too much in my brain to handle, and then inevitably I think what comes out is something weird and just could only be the result of the collage process in my own head or my team's heads. So that would be how I would start, and I guess I would just be using things from the 90s and things from now, and then I mean, I would also look farther back and I would think about the people that are making cool stuff in the 90s, who were they looking at? And I'd put it all together and try to come up with something that didn't look like anything you were seeing.
So this is all the questions I had, but we'll take questions from the audience now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Ricky.
I have some metaphors too. The one you were talking about, the dinner party. I compare it to like a library. You don't want a bunch of bird books. You know what I mean?
But you might want a few bird books. I think that's a great
I'm not finished. Also about the DeMenil house, Charles James hated Philip Johnson. That's very important.
The tension.
Because Charlie was like a big queen, and Philip Johnson was like like a businessman. So he picked out all these Baroque colors, and he got these Belcher chairs. You know what those are? Belter. They're like classic Victorian. Looks like the movie Giant or something. Just because it's in Texas, and so I don't know, Charlie. That's the way he thinks.
the Belter furniture, yeah, like those Victorian things with this fruit on the top, yeah.
What else? He would make crushed velvet. He had really old references, in the way he thought. Like all the colors were all like really Baroque colors, and he put a big vase on top of the piano, like a huge vase, And what else? Dominique. I was down there when the Twombly Museum opened, and so I met Dominique. And I told her that I worked for Charlie for a little bit, and she said, "Oh, you have to come tomorrow. I'll give you a tour." So we ended up in the closet, in like a dressing room, sitting on the floor, looking at these cabinets that were all like pastel, like checkerboards kind of things, And I don't know.
So cool. We're so lucky. That's amazing.
You were talking about color. I have another saying that the colors are like people. There's no such thing as a bad person. Some are just more difficult, to deal with.
That's good.
I don't know if everyone could hear, but Ricky said, there's no such thing as a bad color. They're like people. Some are just more difficult to deal with. I agree with that. Yeah, actually, also, speaking of kind of thinking about zeitgeist and trend and how to resist the temptation to sort of follow what everyone else is doing, there's a whole recurring bit in the Double Vision book about the DeMenils, about the idea of sort of being attracted to the things you hate. And I really love that. And then I've since heard that sort of similar philosophy talked about by Mucha Prada, who also has said that she designs collections about the things that she hates.
What kind of things do you hate?
She did a crochet collection because she hates crochet.
And after she spent time in the hospital, she did a whole collection of hospital scrub stuff and mixed with sneakers.
I told her, I said, that's very Warholian, because Andy always did the wrong thing on purpose,
Yeah, I think it's
sort of
worth...
make the wrong thing right,
It definitely has always seemed to me creatively very worth it to explore things that you hate.
Do you have any examples?
Yes, I do.
Any what?
Examples
Of what?
of things he doesn't like.
Oh.
Of things I hate. There's a great, Nicky Haslam has this whole thing about things that he hates, and he has a shirt that has everything he hates on it. Steampunk, yes, thank you. Thank you, yes.
Do you like these lights?
Those lights or these lights?
I like these, but I don't know why these are, I always thought these were temporary when I first saw them, but they're always here.
Well, I don't know, but I do hate steampunk, and I'm very interested in steampunk, and I'm kind of I think you
what are
heard it
you
here first,
saying?
people. I think steampunk is so scary and so
What is
revolting
that?
to me. Maybe don't worry about it. I don't know.
I think anything's okay.
It's like that movie Wild Wild West.
Anything's okay if you do it the right way, even murder. You know.
Well, maybe. But steampunk is terrifying, and I do think that there's got to be something amazing about it. And there's just got to be. It's obviously so rich and interesting and like messed up. And I know that in 10 years, if I work hard at it, I'm gonna unlock the Dominilian aura within steampunk. I just know it. It's possible. You can always find something you love about anything.
I have.
Oh, she has the mic.
You mentioned Gaetano Pesce. I'm curious. How do you think it's easy to mix his pieces, and how do you think it's going to endure the passage of time?
Well, I do think that it will endure because it's like become such a part of history, and it's impacted so many people's way of thinking, not to mention just their careers, you know. I mean, there's just so many people that worked for him that have gone on to become influential themselves, and there are so many people that refer to him, and the pieces have appeared in so many important interiors that have affected all these other things, that it just like is part of history. So it's like saying, like, you know, will Victorian period endure? It's like, well, it has to, because it's everywhere, and it just is part of the DNA of the society we're dealing with and the culture we have. So it will always be interesting, even if we change our perspective to it, you know, for whatever reason. So I do think, for instance, with him, I think those pieces will just always be interesting. Maybe it will be different reasons why they're interesting. You know, maybe it will become the basis of a movement that rejects it. But even then, it'll still be interesting because people will have rejected it, and you'll be curious, you know, what that's about. Not to mention, I think anything that is so expressively from someone's, you know, kind of creative core, anything that's just so much of an explosion of someone's personal vision, such as those furnitures are, is always just incredibly impressive. Like, I think people that can create whole worlds and just kind of explode tons and tons and tons of things out into the world, you always have to like look twice, you know? Like, I do think there's something interesting about the way quantity affects this conversation too, you know? Like, sometimes I think about that with Fornasetti, like that, you know, he made so many different things and so much, and he just put so much out into the world that, you know, maybe it would be less interesting, actually, if he had just made a few of those things. But it's just that it's just an explosion of creativity and vision, and you just have to pay attention to that because it's big, and it's like taking up a lot of room, and a lot of people are seeing it and looking at it, and it's in everyone's psyche, so it is important, whether you like it or not, I guess. And so then it becomes less about whether you like it. But with the Pesce stuff, it's so sculptural, it's so artistic, it's so singularly him, and it's important, and does something cool for your mind when you look at it, that it just goes everywhere too, you know? Like, I don't think there's any room that wouldn't look better for having a Pesce something in it. Yeah. True.
that your apartment that you photographed was an homage to a certain designer, and I didn't hear his name. And also, I was wondering if you could describe it more, because it does sound like a really cool project as you are becoming who you are as a designer.
Well, it was very funny thing. I mean, I didn't know even that I wanted to be an interior designer. I really thought I wanted to be a furniture designer. So it was seen as a way to show my furniture, really, that I was presenting for my senior year. But yeah, the apartment was supposed to be this homage to Nicky de Gunsberg, is the guy's name, and he was a fashion guy. So he was an editor, and he was very involved in the world of fashion, not really interiors per se. And I was thinking about his apartment when he moved to New York and sort of downsized from a very grand life to a very, to a one-room apartment. And so because I was trying to think to myself, oh, what can I do with my one-room apartment? And I was trying to think of what? Well, the first one I think was at the Ritz, and then the second one was in a townhouse on the Upper East Side, and it was like a living room of a townhouse. And I was trying to think, what is a good reference point for a one-room apartment, and I arrived there. And it was, what I had read about it is that he was using a lot of black and gold, and it was white, and it had a lot of black and gold Empire furniture in it, and a canopy bed, a twin canopy bed. And he was Jewish, but he had an amazing crucifix in there. So I did the same. I had a huge crucifix over my bed.
I love this essay, Architecture by Adolf Loos, and he talks about how his greatest achievement is when a building of his photographs badly or like has no particular effect in the two-dimensional. I was wondering what your relationship is to photographing your projects, and what do you like in a picture versus not like?
That's such an interesting question, and yeah, I think a lot about the image, the two-dimensional image, and I think I always wanted to be a set designer. Like, a little part of me always wanted to be a set designer, and so and we've gotten to work on some sets now, and it's really like I love it, and I do think about the way the picture, not necessarily photograph, but the idea of like a picture of something. And we present watercolors a lot of times for our rooms to show the scheme, and so I make these watercolors to show someone, option A and option B of their living room, and that, starting, I guess, with a two-dimensional proposition for someone does wind up affecting how, you think about line and form and color, and so in a way there is sort of like a painterly approach in what I'm doing always to a room, but I like that idea that if it can't really be captured in a photograph, then it means that maybe it's sort of above that, and or above, the fleeting pleasure that an image can give you, that is worth more than that. And I do think that even though I am thinking about things two-dimensionally, I mean, I am trying to make something that's much more than an image. But I like the image. I like the movie. I like the magazine I'm editing in my head, and I enjoy that kind of that prompt. But the goal is definitely to make things that are more than the photograph. That's an inspiring thought. Yeah.
I think him.
You guys have talked a lot about the idea of trend as it relates to time, and is it possible to get out of the time that you're in, or the zeitgeist, and to transcend it? And do you even want to do that necessarily? It's theoretically impossible to get out of the time that you're in. But I think one interesting thing that I think you might do in your work is start from a narrative, right? Like, what is the movie that we're making in this project? What is like this narrative that's like the bedrock of what we're gonna do, and it's gonna guide the decisions. And that narrative is a way of transcending, like, somewhat how you're being influenced by the time that you're in. I mean, obviously the narrative that you choose could be influenced by the time, but do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, and I think we're not trying, when we're working on a project, we're not trying to create something that looks like it was made in that day. Is that kind of what you mean? We're always trying to make something that has some spirit of the Marie Laure de Noailles slipcover over the modernist furniture. I mean, I would like to leave my projects finished looking like they've been redecorated or that like the punk kid has moved in and messed it up, or that that times changed, or that they lost all their money, or whatever the narrative would be. I mean, I do want it to already look like that, and I think that part of that is like I'm trying to bake into all of our projects the potential for change and growth, and I want it to be able to keep going. And so I've set it in motion by sort of artificially maybe creating something. It then can actually change and can actually grow into itself. And yes, yeah. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And that is
really
so
clever.
fun. I mean, that is kind of the yeah, I mean, I do. Well, something that's kind of interesting that comes up a lot in our projects is that, a house is really complicated, and all houses, even if they're from 10 years ago, a lot of different people have had to work on them to make them exist in the first place. So, you don't really, the idea that someone is going to really be a single auteur of an entire house, I mean, it's a great idea, but it's kind of impossible. I mean, there's a client, there's an architect, there's an interior designer, there's a garden designer, then there's a budget, there's nature, there's the place, contractor, terrible contractor, good contractor, 4 contractors later. There's so many different people that are working on this thing. And then, if you're commissioning an artist to make something, they're doing something. If you have an art collection that is coming from partially the parents of the one person, and then you have a library coming from the cousin of the other person, and you have, what happens to be at auction when you need the thing. I mean, it's so, and those things were picked by somebody that had their own perspective. I mean, there's so many different parts of how these projects come together, and so many perspectives, and so many creative visions that have to be sort of stitched together. And I don't believe that there's, I don't believe in this idea that there's just like, it's your project. I mean, it comes up actually quite often, I think, in magazine, when we're doing an article for a magazine. I always am really scratching my head about, like, where do you stop giving credit? I mean, it's like there's just so many. It's like, okay, well, so you redid this room that was already done by a decorator not that long ago, 10 years ago, and they made changes to it that made it look the way that it looked to some extent. And then, they were also working on a house that was by an architect that was an important architect. So, the magazine might say to you, oh, well, the house is by that architect. But, the room that's the cover story of the article is really been shaped also by the interior designer before, but it's like how many names can you put into one article and whatever. It gets very confusing, and I think it would be good if everybody would appreciate and have like a healthy dose of appreciation for the fact that houses are made by so many different people, and there's so many different auteurs coming together to make this thing. And it's not an artist with a body of work at a gallery. It's something very different, and it's like alive, and you can't contain it. And so I always wanted the interiors that we make also to reflect that to some extent, and that's why I've always thought of them as collage, because I'm going into it with that as the premise. Like, it's not my invention, you know. It's a lot of people working together to make this thing, whether they wanted to or not. I mean, they're in the story.
You said something funny, a funny quote once about how you price jobs. It's like according to how much you have to do with it. Like if they let me do what I want, it's cheaper. You know what I mean?
Oh. I wish. I don't really remember that. Well, I think it was just like a meme that I reposted or something. But I like the idea that, yeah, it gets more expensive the more input the client has. Yeah. I think that was what the meme was. It was like, if they want, you know, if they want to be really involved, like, it's going to be extremely expensive. And if they don't want to be involved, it can be free. Yeah. But that's not my billing structure, so don't get any wrong ideas. I'll have to dig it up. Maybe I'll post it on Instagram. Yeah. I'll dig it up. I'll post it on Instagram. It's kind of funny. It's a very it's precocious for a rental apartment for a senior in college. I had grand visions for it.
Anyone else?
Thank you. You talked a lot about like timeless classics and also about collage. I was wondering, do you ever have a sense that you're designing in 2024? Like, we're in the mid-20s now, and what does that mean? And you're designing rooms that maybe people will think of as being like a very 20s design or early 21st century design or whatever it is. Do you have a sense of being of this time? And if so, like, what does this time look like?
I do, and I think certain interests of mine are perfectly in line with the interests of people in my generation, sort of philosophically. Not everybody, but I think, you know, for instance, I mean, I can just name a few examples. I'm really interested in curtains and fabric and walls that are made out of fabric, and the idea that something solid, something that you think should be solid, like a wall, can be made out of something soft. And obviously that's a simple enough gesture. I mean, decorators have been making tinted rooms forever, but in a way also, I think we've done a lot of rooms with curtain walls. We've encased rooms in curtains, and I have a feeling that in 50 years, if somebody is to look back, if I'm lucky enough that somebody cares and they're looking at these rooms, they'll probably say, oh yeah, that was kind of part of this whole thing where people were thinking about, you know, hierarchical definitions in architecture, and the difference between architecture and interiors was beginning to break down a little. This like formerly extremely rigid division between interior design and architecture that had existed since the 60s was beginning to kind of change at that moment. And people were sort of mixing them. And there were actually a bunch of designers that were and architects that were sort of architects doing interior design and interior designers doing architecture. And they were all thinking about Wiener Werkstätte and these times when people were, you know, when architects could design fabric. And it'll look like it was part of a thing and a whole kind of way of thinking that had to do with questioning hierarchies and gender norms in our field and whatever. And I think, you know, so something like that, I do feel like will place me in a very specific time. And I think that that's because those are less than like a trend of a color or a material or a designer. It's like a philosophical change in our approach to things in our society. And that is very emblematic of our generation. So that would be like one example that maybe sort of speaks to the larger idea there. Always.
Anyone else? Thanks so much to everyone for coming.
Thank you, Elena.